Hello! Today I'm talking about 64mm SSP Unimodal version 1. Yes, there is a Unimodal version 1, but first of all, let me talk about the garbage naming scheme that SSP has. Really, let's kind of go over the 64mm, like what exists in the 64mm world. I may be wrong right here, but let's give a try. So there are basically two styles of burrs that SSP makes. There is the 64mm high uniformity, quote unquote, espresso. Then you have 64mm unimodal, which is really brew or multi-purpose. The issue is the two words brew and multi-purpose. Here's how you differentiate, or here is how you can try to differentiate. Both of these are unimodal burr sets. The issue here is that multi-purpose and brew are kind of interchangeable, it seems. What you have to figure out is if it's version 1 or version 2. So basically, SSP, from my understanding, came out with the 64mm Unimodal Espresso version 1. Those used to be called 64mm Brew. And then, I think option O, somebody messed around with them. And now we have 64mm Multipurpose, which is Unimodal version 2, which can also be referred to as Brew. And that's really what most of the retailers like Fellow and all these other guys carry, is mainly multi-purpose Unimodal version 2, which is the latest upgraded design of the Unimodal Burr set. I think I am correct there. Now, how you can also additionally differentiate, and this is where things get really confusing, is red speed, the coating. So when you see somebody online talking about when they get SSP red speed burrs, I will tell you that does not mean anything, because you can actually get pretty much all the SSP burrs in red speed. What matters is really the geometry. Is it the unimodal version 1 or the unimodal version 2, or is it high uniformity? Because with all three of those, you can get them in red speed, you can get them in silver night, and you can get them in all these other random coatings. So that is the issue, and when you see people talking online about, hey, I got SSP burrs in my grinder, you should really ask them which ones. With that out of the way, let's talk about SSP Unimodal version 1. I'm going to now refer to multi-purpose as V2, and I'm going to refer to these as V1. What are the differences between V1 and V2? Basically, the differences are down to the outer surface or the outer cutting edge. In cup, they're actually quite similar. These are both incredibly high clarity burrs, but there are some caveats. Let me kind of give you guys the analogy, the breakdown as to what is different between version 1 and version 2. So this is a fun analogy for those of you who are also into headphones, or all of you audiophiles. As you may notice, I'm also an audiophile, which is also terrible. But in my opinion, version 1 and version 2 are like the definition of neutral. The difference is that the definition of neutral is dependent on who you're talking to. So I would say the version 1 definition of neutral is your audio engineer neutral, which is super flat. Just in the coffee context, it is incredibly clear. It's like, this is what the coffee should taste like. Getting a very basic, true to representation of what things should taste like. Version 2 are like the enthusiast's definition of neutral, where neutral is not actually so flat, because if it was flat, it would be super boring. V2 are really, well, super clear as well, but I feel like version 2 are just a little bit sweeter. There's like some little coloring in it, as some of you headphone enthusiasts would say. So to elaborate a bit more on that is, these are both like analytical burr sets. The difference is that version 1 have a higher skill cap. You could actually get a clearer cup than V2. The difference is that V2 is so much easier to dial in. So these are both still fast flowing, high extracting burrs that really like longer ratios, like those 1:3 espressos, and in filter, they are both amazing. So in my opinion, I'm getting the same exact effects with version 1 as version 2, is just super sharp, crisp acidity presentation on your tongue. You understand what the coffee is supposed to taste like, but oftentimes I'm finding multi-purpose or V2 to just be a little bit sweeter. Both of these are just really, really clear burrs. Dialing in version 1 is a pain. It is a lot of effort. Like, you actually have to get good. If you aren't good, these will punish you. It will enhance all the good properties of whatever you're doing, but it'll also enhance all the bad properties. So if you prep wrong, if you pour weirdly, all of those user errors will actually be enhanced more, which kind of sucks. I actually much prefer the cups when you get it right in V1 over V2. But I'll be honest here, if I never tasted V1, if I never had them side by side, V2 would already be clear enough. It would be everything that I would be looking for in a Burr set, at least for the money. Version 1 will allow you to basically push what is the clearest presentation of coffee that you can possibly get, especially in the 64mm size. In my opinion, it's kind of a double-edged sword, is that, well, really, it's difficult to dial in, but the second is that I don't know if that's actually something that you really want. Like, I don't know if you actually want a cup that is so clear, because sometimes with these incredible high clarity cups, it's just like acidic. It's like, I don't know, it doesn't taste good. It's like, cool, I can taste everything, but I don't know if that's an enjoyable cup. And oftentimes I would probably pick the version 2 Burr set simply because it is just easier to use, and also because they're not as clear. Like, they're already very clear, but they're not as clear as version 1. They have like kind of like a roundness and sweetness to them. You get, well, a really clear cup, but also very enjoyable. But this has the potential to go even more than that. And I think that is something to really consider. When I was messing around with the grind size here, really trying to dial it in, oftentimes I would taste kind of bitterness or astringencies, like maybe I was pushing it a little too much, but I would basically do the same thing with V2 MP, and like I would get a tasty cup. The thing is when I got it right on version 1, it was insane. It's like, oh, wow, now I know why these are good. So basically, when you dial this in properly, and you're going to need to spend a lot of time and effort to do that, when you get it in right, you are getting a cup that is even clearer than multi-purpose, and I would even argue more sweet, where you just get a perfect presentation. It's, you know, a very analytical Burr set. It's like you just get that clear presentation of what the notes on the coffee taste like. But generally speaking, the differences are kind of, I would say, in the sweetness of multi-purpose. V2 oftentimes has a little bit of, well, coloring to it, and I think that's actually probably more enjoyable to most people, is you don't necessarily always want to be drinking battery acid, and V1s are a great way to taste a lot of battery acid. And that's something that's preferable to a lot of people, but V2 kind of take the edge off of things. A little bit rounder, nice sweetness to it, but also very sharp acidic presentation of coffee. And I think that's really why people like V2, is they are chasing a very clear cup. So because the outer cutting surfaces are different on version 1 and version 2, version 1 can actually lock if you, I think if you actually go really, really close for espresso, so you just want to be very careful of that. But I think for most folks, you're probably better off picking V2, unless you really want a challenge. Say, I guess an interesting thing to think about is if you're a beginner and if you learned how to dial in with V1, you punished yourself, maybe you're a masochist, your dialing in skills would be absolutely amazing. If you could dial these in, you could dial in anything. And I think that's a very interesting challenge, or a way to teach yourself, but mostly I would recommend these for enthusiasts or people trying to R&D. You spend a lot of time and effort dialing these Burrs in, and once you get it in right, you're like, whoa, wait, I did it right. And you can tell in the cups, like you can actively tell in your cups that your cups are getting better and better and better as you get the grind size correct, as you get the profiles down, and it's really adjusting your skills to these specific Burrs. And I think that's actually very, very fun, and I would really consider that, especially considering these Burrs are quite cheap in the grand scheme of things for what they do. I would really argue that for the money, like when these are at peak dialed in, I would really think these would cost a lot more than how much they do cost. So yeah, you know, do you really want to be punched in the face by your user errors? Or do you even want to be punched in the face with such a clear cup? That is actually something you should think about. But I think for most people, just pick V2. You will have a much easier time, and you'll also get a cup that is very, very clear and very enjoyable, a little bit sweeter at times. But if you're up to the challenge and you want to basically test how good you are at this coffee stuff, V1 are actually an incredibly interesting choice to think about, especially considering the cost. So these Burrs are generally sub 200, especially on the used market. You'll most likely find the Silver Knight version of V1, and of course make sure you are buying V1 because most retailers do sell V2 or multi-purpose, but the only place I can think of right now, or the two places I can think of right now for you to actually get them, is you can hit up SSP themselves, just email them, or hope the guy checks your Instagram message, or you can buy a Lagom P64 and pick it with the Unimodal version 1. But I think for most folks, you probably would be better off going with a setup like this, which is a DF64 with the Unimodal version 1s, like find used Unimodal version 1s, stick them in. The guy lending me these might actually be selling his, so let me know if you want to buy the Burrs in here. I can put you in contact with Spencer. He's the owner of this Burr set in here. But otherwise, that's all I want to talk about today, which is Unimodal version 1. Super interesting Burr set, just very analytical, very clear, but they can punish you and all of your user errors will be shown. But I think if you're up to the challenge, you will be vastly rewarded. But that's all I want to talk about today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you around.